Hello, welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is December 1st, 2021, and there's a confluence of events which make it absolutely evident how important the impact that we are having and our supporters are having on a whole series of events unfolding internationally. Let's start with the pandemic and the emergence of this Omicron variation. And we're having a conference this Saturday, an emergency meeting titled The Urgent Need for a World Health System. That's Saturday at 1 p.m. on the Schiller Institute. Why don't we start with that, Helga? Why is this so important right now?
Well, because it should be clear now that this pandemic is not, first of all, it is existent. And we just discussed earlier among some people that there are still some people who think it's not dangerous and it's just like a flu. I mean, this is a denial of reality, which is hardly understandable given the fact that, many people are dying. We have a situation out of control in Germany. People are talking about triage. Can you imagine in a rich country like Germany, they are talking about not being able to treat patients because of a lack of intensive care beds? In France, we have a fifth wave now from several South African countries. Reports about the new variant, this Omicron, and it just really makes very, very clear that something dramatically has to change. Therefore, we have a very important event this coming Saturday at 1 o'clock European time, US time, East Coast time, and 7 o'clock in the evening European time. So if you hear this or see the invitation, make sure you attend it. We will have an up-to-date discussion of many specialists from around the world, and also a plan of action, what to do. Now, I think the most important news in this respect is coming from the World Health Organization, and they just announced that they are working on a global accord for pandemic prevention and response, and that should be announced by the 1st of March. Now, that is very late, but it means there is time to influence the global accord, and that has been our concern from the very beginning. Now, this will have to be in the right way, and I want to read to you from an article which I can only now roughly translate. I mean, this is a quote from the middle of it. It says, if one looks at the conditions today in many nations in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and even in the poor regions in Europe and the United States, then it should be clear that only a global change in politics can basically be a solution. At this point, about 2 billion people have no clean drinking water. In most of the so-called developing countries, one cannot even talk about a modern health system. You have a hunger epidemic in many countries in South Africa, a locust plague. And if the world community is not, against which the world community has not moved in time, and now are threatening many states in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, as a result of the so-called humanitarian interventionist wars and the already mentioned underdevelopment, there are millions and millions of refugees on the way to Europe and United States. If we want to prevent that the coronavirus pandemic comes back in waves and moves from the northern to the southern hemisphere and comes back and then creates the petri dish for many similar and even worse viruses, then we have to have a radical change of the system. And then it demands, what has to be done in terms of production of modern health system, modern hospitals, clean water, electricity, infrastructure. Now, this article, this was written beginning of March 2020 by myself. And in that article, I demand already everything which is now coming to the fore. And I think that should also be food for thought, because it should have been clear from the very beginning that if you are dealing with a pandemic, you have the danger of the mutation of viruses. And these viruses, they can reach a point where even if you have a vaccine, which was not in sight in March 2020, but now we do have efficient vaccines. But if we do not take care of the situation in every country, like in Africa, Asia, Latin America, you have mutations. It's not yet clear how dangerous and lethal this Omicron virus is, but you can have mutations which, in this case, there were about 30 mutations, and if it turns out that the existing vaccines are not efficient, well, Moderna and Pfizer, uh, or rather BioNTech, they declared that they are confident that they can develop then a new adjusted vaccine within 3 weeks, but that it takes another 6 months to have that new vaccine tested and produced. So that means you would have a vacuum of 6 months, and you can imagine what kind of devastation that will cause. So it should dawn on everybody that we really need to uh, treat the roots, and the roots and causes are the underdevelopment. Because if you have entire continents where the population has a very poor immune system because of malnutrition, because of lack of clean water, and there are many other diseases, malaria, AIDS, and people with a suppressed immune system, they can be the host of such mutations without even knowing it. So we have reached a point now where we have to remedy the situation. We need a modern health system in every single country. That means modern hospitals with ICU units, with respiration machines, with modern educated nurses and doctors. And you need for that electricity, lots of it, infrastructure, clean water, uh, energy, a lot of it. And all of that means without the economic development of these countries, you cannot provide modern healthcare. So we have reached the point in the history of humanity where the absolutely criminal underdevelopment of the developing sector, which is the relict of the colonial period, and which Franklin D. Roosevelt had intended to overcome with the Bretton Woods system, but then he died, and Bretton Woods was implemented by Truman and Churchill and such people. So it never fulfilled this idea to give credit to overcome the underdevelopment in the developing sector. And up to the point where China started with the Belt and Road Initiative, this poverty persisted. And naturally, it is of such a dimension that even the economic power of China is not sufficient to do it, but you need all countries to work together and to overcome geopolitics for good. So when we are talking about a world health system, we are really talking about ending of an idiotic geopolitical confrontation of humanity, and that will be a big test case if we are intelligent enough to survive or not. So I would like you, if you agree with what I'm saying, or even if you don't agree, enter a dialogue with us. But if you agree, help us to put this on the agenda, because we published already more than a year ago the exact program. We need 30,000 new modern hospitals. We need 1.5 billion new productive jobs to accomplish that. And that kind of a mobilization really requires the help of many people. So I'm really speaking to you personally to come on board and be part of it.
And I believe we'll be publishing the leaflet that you wrote back in March 2020, which was so prescient. It should be up on our website so people can read it, along with the letter from Dr. Joycelyn Elders calling for an educational process, which seems to be taking hold. The Russian doctors that put out a statement, the Nurses Union, International Nurses Union, So it looks as though people are beginning to move on this.
Yes, there are many initiatives. There is an initiative from about, I don't know, 60 uh, clinic chiefs in Germany who make an urgent appeal to the government to change their policies. Then you have this nursing union. They basically, attack the fact that uh, the rich countries have taken 7 billion of the available doses, while the vast majority of poor countries only got 300 million. I mean, that is what causes these mutations. That has to stop. Apartheid has to stop. And then you have another open letter from virologists from several dozen countries who make an urgent appeal that the world has at most 1 year left before such possibly resistant, medicine resistant viruses develop. And, all of these people are in motion. And naturally, you know that the medical personnel in the hospitals in Germany, for sure, but in many other countries like Ukraine. In Ukraine, the health system is completely at a breakdown point. The doctors and the nurses who are working in these hospitals, they are at the point of collapse because this is going on since almost 2 years. So it's urgent time to increase the pay of the medical personnel, to build more hospitals, to reverse the privatization of the health system, because health is not something which should be subject to making profit, but it should serve the common good. So all of this has to go into this global accord, and we should really educate the population, because if we do our job right, this can be the beginning of a change for the better.
You mentioned the danger of geopolitics as underlying the continued underdevelopment of the former colonial world. Well, we see this again at play in the mobilization by the U.S. war hawks of NATO against Russia over Ukraine. It's worth noting there are meetings going on, NATO foreign ministers meeting. There was a NATO summit last Monday in Brussels. Uh, but at the same time, they're announcing the prospect of a Biden-Putin meeting sometime early next year. So catch us up on just exactly how dangerous this is, because the Russians are not playing games.
Well, according to very qualified experts, both in respect to China and Taiwan, as well as in respect to Russia and Ukraine, red lines which have been drawn by these nations pertaining to their absolute security interest have been crossed several times, and the West just ignores it. But this will come with a payment eventually, because you cannot continue to do this. Right now, there is a NATO foreign minister meeting in Riga, where the foreign ministers of Georgia and Ukraine have been invited, with the implication that these two countries eventually will join NATO, which is one of those red lines, because then the security interest of Russia is being targeted, and quite adequately, Putin is now demanding from NATO a legal agreement that they will not expand further to the east. And he says, we have seen NATO breaking their promises repeatedly, so we want to have a legal treaty to this effect. Now, I think this is, we are sitting on the powder keg of a potential nuclear war, because alone in the last months, 30 US strategic bombers came very close, up to 15 miles to the Russian border. 5 of these planes were nuclear capable. And I think Stoltenberg had said that if the new German government does not want to participate in the nuclear participation, meaning German pilots can fly nuclear weapons in case of a military aggression, military conflict, which is incredible. He said if the German government would not want to continue this nuclear participation, it would be quite easy to move those nuclear weapons more to the east. Now, that again is a red line, and Lukashenko from Belarusia has said that, if that happens, then he is offering to Putin to put Russian nuclear weapons into Belarus. And then you can see, how this is moving towards a potential point of no return. So this is really very, very dangerous. And the same goes for China and Taiwan, where the red line has been crossed several times by essentially US forces giving credibility or giving encouragement to the forces of independence in Taiwan. And, the biggest danger naturally is that these two conflicts would flare up at the same time. And, we would be in World War III in no time. So I think this really should be in the conscience. And I cannot see any reasonable debate in the public media or among politicians warning of such a danger. And that is almost like sleepwalking into World War III.
Well, not surprising, we have the comments of the head of MI6, the British Foreign Intelligence, Moore, who made his first major public statement just the other day. And what he said is that the NATO countries must take on Russia, China, Iran, and terrorism, but primary threat is coming from China. So just on cue, you have a total mobilization of NATO along these lines of crossing the red lines. Now, ironically, there's going to be a democracy summit called for by Joe Biden, supposedly to counter the authoritarian regimes. You have any comments on this, Helga?
Yeah, that is a strange thing, because if you look at the people, at the countries who are invited, and I don't want to step on the toes of any of these countries, but there are many of them which are generally not regarded as democracies at all. And on the other side, if you look at the list of countries who are not invited, you have such countries as Russia, China, Hungary, many countries. So what is that doing? It forces countries which are being categorized to be autocratic regimes into an alliance. So you're moving Russia and China closer together. There was already recently a joint statement from Russia and China in response to all of these things. So you are creating new geopolitical blocks. And, this is very, very dangerous. And I think it's a typical case of somebody who sits in the glass house and is throwing with stones. Because, the state of democracy in the United States itself is not exactly one of glory. And this has been highlighted by Diane Sayre, who is a candidate for Senate against Schumer in New York, who just wrote an open letter to the summit, because what has happened is she's running as an independent candidate against Schumer, mainly because, not only, but mainly because of the policy of legalization of drugs pushed by Schumer. Um, so, what happened, that without much public attention, they changed the rules, where previously independent candidates had to collect 15,000 signatures, I think within 6 weeks, which is very short. And then without public debate, they changed that and said you have to collect 45,000 votes in the same period. And naturally, if you know the business of collecting signatures, you always have to collect at least double to be sure that they're all valid. So that would mean that she would have to collect more than 100,000 signatures in 6 weeks. Now that makes it almost unsurmountable. And at the same time, they changed the rules for the smaller parties, that they don't need 50,000 votes in the last election to be back on the ballot, but they need 2%. Now that throws out the Libertarian Party and the Green Party. So it is a completely arbitrary way of changing the rules in such a way that only the officially mainstream approved parties like the Republican and the Democratic Party have a chance to run. Now she is fighting that, and one part of the fight is to take this to the Democracy Summit, because if the United States wants to be the leader of democracy, they should apply more democracy at home first, because that would give them a better position to speak on the issue. So I think that party system is completely wrong. As George Washington made the point when he left his first left his office, by warning, that the party system, is very dangerous, because it leads to one section of the population trying to rule over the other one. And we see in Germany right now that the party system does not function. I mean, in Germany, it does not matter if you vote for the Liberal Party or the Green Party, which are very opposite on almost all points, like migration, like taxes, like many other issues, or you vote for the SPD, because now you have a coalition of all three, and they have to make a coalition agreement, which means that you get a cocktail of the opinions of these three parties, but every voter gets the same cocktail to drink, which probably is very badly tasting for most of the people who thought they vote for their preference. So that, is one more case that the parliamentarian system really does not function. And I could say a lot more about it, but I want to leave it at that, and propose that one may think about a representative system which really works. And there are different models than the one which we have right now in most of Western countries. So I really think that the Democracy Summit will be tested by all of these things, and we should see. But it right now looks more like a geopolitical maneuver rather than being concerned about democracy as such.
Well, one aspect of the Democracy Summit is going to be the continued attacks on Russia, supposedly for suppressing opposition, suppressing free press. All you have to do is look at the example you gave from Diane's case of keeping parties off the ballot, on top of which you have censorship. And clearly, the US is no longer qualified as a democracy under those kinds of definitions. Now, at the same time you have this war buildup, we're watching the disintegration of Western economies with the combined effects of hyperinflation and the collapse of efficient energy systems. There's recently been some reports from Germany on this that are really quite astounding, but the whole world is now facing a profound crisis in the aftermath of the COP26 summit.
Yes, we have now in October, the average inflation rate was 5%, but naturally, that includes, things which people never buy, or buy maybe once every 10 years. But for energy, heating, gasoline, food, the inflation was much, much higher. And there is right now, really a increasing awareness in the population that this is eating all your savings, and is expropriating, especially the poor, because they immediately notice it. If you are a billionaire and you have 2 private jets and a yacht, it probably doesn't affect you. But for the average population, it is becoming quite a subject of concern. And there are now many people who said this is only a transitionary inflation. They are now admitting that there is no way how this inflation will go away, and it's very likely to continue and get worse. So that brings on the table the 4 laws of Linden-LaRouche: Glass-Steagall, national banking system, credit system, and then you can get it under control by completely throwing out this speculation, which is driving all of this. So we are heading towards a point where that will force itself on the table, or you will have social chaos and masses in the streets in many countries around the world.
And on the energy question, you were talking a little bit before about the Green Party and the new government in Germany. We're seeing reports coming out now which show that there will be an unbridgeable energy gap in Germany, not by 2040, but even this winter. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there are many people now warning, that this will not function. I mean, first of all, the plan to cover 2% of the territory of Germany with alternative energy, windmills and solar panels. Can you imagine the beautiful Germany? I mean, just imagine 2% of everything will be covered by these ugly, destructive things which kills birds, which is just think, what destruction of the landscape this will do. But it also will not function because, as Flassbeck, who is a former, I think, UN official and former deputy finance minister, he said that there will be a shortage of 80 to 100 gigawatt in Germany. Then the Italian development minister basically warned that there will be blackouts, and he appealed to the European Union, EU Commission, that this will affect all of Europe. And the French, naturally, because they have some problems themselves, will not be able to export dirty nuclear electricity. I'm kidding, naturally. So there will be a problem, and I think this incoming government, this so-called streetlight coalition, I can only say this will be the winter of discontent, because they will not, they are, with their ideological premises, they will not be able to deal well with what is in the store for this coming winter. So that just puts again the point on the table, or the topic on the table, that we have to really think about a change of the system. We have to start with a World Health System, but then we have to recognize that the neoliberal system has not functioned. It came to an end. It could not cope with the pandemic. It is unfit to deal with the issue of the third world development. And you can see Ursula von der Leyen just announced the global gateway, so-called counter to the Belt and Road Initiative of the Chinese. However, this is again a balloon full of hot air, because the 300 billion she talks about is supposed to be largely financed by private investments. And we have seen where all these plans, which were mentioned before, have gone. And this is all the more ridiculous because this comes at a moment where China is having a very, very important meeting in Senegal with the African Union, the so-called FOCAC meeting. And already there are many, many real projects have been announced. So it's a futile effort to oppose China rather than agreeing to the offer of a win-win cooperation. And especially, Xi Jinping not long ago offered a quad for development of offering to Germany and France to work with them in China for the development of Africa. So that would have been a reasonable proposal. But this Ursula von der Leyen is hopeless. She's the ideology incarnated. So as long as she is in this position, there's nothing positive to be expected to come from the EU. So I think that leaves us with the absolute need to build an anti-Malthusian coalition, and to fight for real third world development, and starting with a real health system for every country. So if you agree with these things, contact us. Don't be passive. Join us.
And I think what you've reviewed in terms of the situation, the party systems in Europe, it's the same thing with the Republicans and Democrats in the United States. There does have to be, as the system is disintegrating, we have to have an alternative. So people should join us, go to the schillerinstitute.com, join our movement, and be sure that you sign up, you register for the conference this Saturday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And Helga, is there anything else you want to say?
No, but I think, our record on the issue is impeccable. My late husband warned against all we are seeing today in 71, in 73. It is 50 years ago. And, I pride myself that, I recognized very early what this pandemic was and suggested the right, solutions. And now more and more people come around. So let's just join hands and really do the kinds of changes needed.
Okay, Helga. Well, thanks for joining us today. And people should be tuning in on Saturday, and we'll see you again next week.
Till next week.